In the early hours of June 11, 1962, guards at one of the most secure prisons ever built began their routine morning count. Every cell appeared occupied. Each bed held what looked like a sleeping inmate. Each prisoner seemed exactly where he was supposed to be. But within minutes something felt wrong. One guard noticed a head that did not move. He reached through the bars, and what he touched was not a person, but a carefully shaped object designed to fool the system itself. Inside a prison surrounded by freezing water, armed patrols, steel doors, and constant surveillance, 3 men had vanished overnight. The question that shocked the world was simple. How did anyone defeat a prison designed to be impossible to escape? This documentary examines the real and verified events behind one of the most famous prison escapes in modern history, the 1962 escape from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, often described as the most secure prison in the United States. Built on an isolated island in San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz was created to hold inmates considered too dangerous or too difficult for other prisons. Its advanced security systems, harsh natural surroundings, and strict routines earned it a reputation as an escape-proof facility. Yet, despite these safeguards, a small group of inmates managed to challenge the very system designed to contain them. This story is presented for educational and historical understanding, focusing not on individuals as legends, but on how institutional systems can fail, even under extreme control. The prison that could not be broken. When Alcatraz opened as a federal prison in 1934, it represented a new philosophy in corrections. The prison stood on a rocky island more than a mile from shore. The surrounding waters were cold, fast-moving, and known for strong currents. Officials believed nature itself acted as the final security barrier. Inside, the structure reinforced that isolation. Cells were built with solid steel bars. Movement was tightly scheduled. Inmates lived under constant supervision. Communication between prisoners was limited, and silence was strongly enforced during large portions of the day. Unlike many prisons at the time, Alcatraz relied not only on guards but also on psychological control. Routine became law. Wake-up times never changed. Meals followed strict timing. Counts were frequent and predictable. Every action inside the prison depended on order and compliance. Officials believed this level of structure removed opportunity, and without opportunity, escape planning would become impossible. Over nearly 3 decades, dozens of inmates attempted escape. All officially failed. Some were quickly captured. Others disappeared into the bay and were presumed lost to the water. Each attempt reinforced the prison's reputation. By the late 1950s, Alcatraz had become known worldwide as the ultimate prison safe, a place designed not just to confine bodies but to eliminate hope itself. But hidden within this system was a weakness few administrators noticed. The prison relied heavily on routine inspections, and routine over time can become predictable. In 1960, a new inmate named Frank Morris arrived on the island. Prison records described him as highly intelligent, disciplined, and skilled at problem-solving. Within months, Morris began quietly studying something most prisoners ignored. Not the guards, not the walls, but the system behind them. And slowly, alongside brothers John and Clarence Anglin, a plan began to form, one that would not attack the prison's strength, but its assumptions. The turning point came when they discovered something unexpected behind their cell walls. Something that should never have existed inside America's most secure prison. What they found would change everything. The weakness in the wall. The turning point began with something small. Behind the sink in each cell was a ventilation opening, designed to carry air through the building. These vents were covered by concrete that had been poured decades earlier, when the prison first opened. Over time the building had aged. Salt air from the bay slowly weakened the structure. Moisture wore down the materials. What was once solid began to soften. Frank Morris noticed this change first. Using a simple metal spoon, reportedly taken from the dining hall, he began testing the concrete around the vent in his cell. To his surprise, it crumbled more easily than expected. The prison had been built to withstand force from the outside. It had not fully accounted for slow, patient work from the inside. Morris quietly shared his discovery with brothers John and Clarence Anglin, who occupied nearby cells. Another inmate, Alan West, later joined the effort. Their method was not fast. Night after night, during the hour reserved for music practice, Morris used the sound of an accordion to mask the faint scraping of metal against concrete. The prison allowed instruments to encourage positive behavior, never suspecting that sound itself could become a shield. Small pieces of wall were removed gradually. Dust was carefully disposed of in the prison yard during exercise periods. To avoid suspicion during inspections, the men crafted false vent covers from materials found inside the prison. They painted them to match the aging walls, blending them into the structure. But widening the vent was only part of the challenge. Beyond the opening lay an unused utility corridor, narrow, dark, and rarely checked. Above that corridor sat a plumbing pipe that led toward the cell house ceiling. Reaching that space required precision and timing. Every evening, guards conducted counts to confirm each inmate was inside his cell. If even one bed appeared empty, the plan would end immediately. So the men created what became one of the most famous elements of the escape: realistic dummy heads. Using soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper, they shaped faces that resembled their own. Real hair collected from the prison barbershop was glued onto the figures. Blankets were arranged carefully beneath them to imitate a sleeping body. When lights dimmed and guards walked past with flashlights, the illusion held. Routine inspections relied on quick visual confirmation. The system trusted what it expected to see. By early June 1962, the holes behind the vents were large enough to crawl through. Above the cell house, in the unused attic space, the men began assembling the final piece of their plan: a raft constructed from over 50 stolen raincoats. The material was stitched and heat-sealed using steam pipes. The goal was simple: create flotation strong enough to survive the bay's cold waters. Each step required patience. Each night increased the risk. Then came the evening of June 11, 1962. Everything was ready. But one problem remained. Alan West struggled to widen his vent opening enough to fit through. Time was running out. The others faced a decision that would define the moment: wait and risk discovery, or leave without him. Shortly after lights out, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers slipped through their vents, climbed into the corridor, and disappeared toward the roof. Alan West remained behind. By the time he cleared his opening, the others were gone. He would later become the only surviving witness to what happened next. Just before midnight, 3 figures climbed down a kitchen vent pipe, crossed the prison yard, and reached the island's northeast shore. There, under darkness and cold wind, they inflated the raft. No one saw them leave. At least not yet. Because the real test of the unbreakable prison was no longer inside its walls. It was in the water. And by morning, Alcatraz would wake up to a silence no one expected. Had the world's most secure prison just been defeated? The morning the safe was empty. At 6:30 a.m. on June 12, 1962, the morning routine began as it always did. Guards walked past the cells of Block B, shining flashlights through the bars. From a distance, everything appeared normal. Blankets were arranged in human shapes. Heads rested on pillows. The count sheet showed no irregularities. But when a guard approached Frank Morris's cell more closely, something unusual caught his attention. The face on the pillow did not move. He tapped it lightly. The head rolled off the bed and fell to the floor. What looked like a sleeping inmate was a carefully crafted dummy. Within seconds, alarms were raised. Officers rushed to the Anglin brothers' cells and discovered the same deception. Behind each sink, ventilation openings had been widened enough for a man to pass through. The escape-proof prison had been breached from within. The cell house was searched immediately. Guards climbed into the utility corridor and followed the route upward to the ceiling. There they found the workshop space where the raft had been assembled. Scraps of raincoat material remained. Improvised tools were scattered across the attic. The scale of the preparation stunned prison officials. For months, the men had worked above the cells without detection. By 8 a.m., the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been notified. Boats began scanning the waters of San Francisco Bay. Helicopters searched from above. The Coast Guard joined the operation. Shorelines were inspected for any sign of arrival. The temperature of the water that night had been approximately 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Currents in the bay were known to be strong and unpredictable. Many officials believed survival was unlikely. But evidence complicated that assumption. On Angel Island, located northeast of Alcatraz, authorities discovered fragments of raincoat material similar to the raft. Footprints were reported in some areas, though they could not be confirmed as belonging to the escapees. A homemade paddle was recovered. Weeks later, parts of a raincoat flotation device were found floating in the bay. No bodies were discovered. The official position of the FBI, after a 17-year investigation, concluded that the men likely drowned in the cold water. Yet the case was never fully closed in the public mind. Letters claiming to be from the escapees surfaced over the years. Family members of the Anglin brothers received mysterious postcards. Photographs emerged decades later suggesting 2 men resembling the brothers might have been alive in Brazil in the 1970s. None of these claims were conclusively proven. In 1979, the FBI formally ended its active investigation, transferring responsibility to the U.S. Marshals Service, which maintains open fugitive cases until proof of death is confirmed. To this day, no definitive evidence has established what happened after the raft entered the water. But one fact is certain. On the morning of June 12, 1962, Alcatraz, the prison considered the most secure in the world, had failed to contain 3 of its inmates. The safe had been broken, and the consequences would extend far beyond the island itself. The question was no longer whether escape was possible. The question was what this failure meant for the future of high-security prisons. Because if Alcatraz could be defeated, what did that say about the system behind it? The system under scrutiny. In the days after the escape, attention turned quickly from the missing men to the institution itself. How could a prison built for the most difficult inmates allow such a breach? Investigators reviewed procedures step by step. They discovered that the concrete around the ventilation vents had deteriorated over time due to moisture and salt air. Maintenance reports had noted structural wear in parts of the building, but repairs were limited. Alcatraz was expensive to operate, and by the early 1960s, it was already under financial pressure. The prison relied heavily on routine counts conducted at fixed times. Guards visually confirmed inmates from the corridor without physically checking each prisoner every night. That routine had become predictable. The dummy heads succeeded not because they were perfect but because the system trusted consistency. Officers were accustomed to seeing sleeping figures under blankets. Quick flashlight checks had worked for years. Until they didn't. Investigators also examined the unused utility corridor above the cells. The space was not regularly inspected. It was considered inaccessible. That assumption proved critical. Security design often focuses on visible barriers, walls, bars, locked doors. But long-term safety also depends on maintenance, oversight, and adaptability. In this case, aging infrastructure and fixed routines created blind spots. At the same time, the escape intensified a debate that was already underway. By 1962, Alcatraz was the most expensive federal prison to operate in the United States. Supplies had to be delivered by boat. Repairs were constant due to corrosion from the bay's environment. Operating costs were significantly higher than those of mainland facilities. Just months after the escape, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy approved plans to close the prison. In March 1963, less than a year after Morris and the Anglin brothers vanished, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary officially shut down. The escape did not cause the closure alone, but it accelerated discussions about cost, infrastructure, and effectiveness. A prison once presented as the ultimate solution to high-risk incarceration was now seen differently. Not as invincible, but as vulnerable. The story of the 3 missing inmates became part of a larger conversation about correctional systems, how they function, how they age, and how overconfidence can weaken even the strongest designs. Yet one issue remained unresolved. Despite years of investigation, no confirmed evidence ever proved whether the men survived. And without that answer, the legend grew. Alcatraz had been designed to remove hope. But after June 1962, hope, at least the idea of it, became the most powerful part of its history. And decades later, the mystery would return to the headlines once again. The mystery that refused to close. In 1979, after nearly 17 years of investigation, the FBI officially ended its active case on the Alcatraz escape. Their conclusion stated that Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin most likely drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. The decision was based on environmental data. Water temperatures that night were low. Currents were strong. Debris from the raft had been recovered, but no confirmed evidence showed the men reached shore. Still, the case did not disappear. Responsibility was transferred to the United States Marshals Service, which keeps fugitive investigations open until death is proven or confirmed. Unlike the FBI's conclusion, the Marshals did not declare the case closed. Over the years, reports surfaced that challenged the official theory. Family members of the Anglin brothers claimed to have received unusual holiday cards signed with their names. Some relatives said flowers were delivered to their mother anonymously every Mother's Day for years after the escape. In 2013, more than 5 decades later, the San Francisco Police Department received a letter allegedly written by a man claiming to be Frank Morris. The writer stated that he had survived the escape and was living under a different identity. He offered to surrender in exchange for medical treatment. The letter could not be authenticated. Then, a photograph taken in Brazil in the 1970s emerged. It showed 2 men resembling the Anglin brothers standing beside a termite mound. Facial recognition analysis later suggested similarities, but experts could not confirm identities with certainty. None of these developments provided definitive proof. At the same time, modern research began revisiting the physical conditions of the escape. In 2014, researchers from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands conducted a study modeling the currents of San Francisco Bay on the night of June 11, 1962. Their findings suggested that, if the men departed at a specific time aligned with tidal shifts, it may have been possible to reach Marin Headlands or Angel Island. The study did not prove survival, but it demonstrated that drowning was not the only possible outcome. Today, the official position remains cautious. No bodies were ever found. No confirmed sightings were verified. No physical evidence established survival. Legally, the men would now be well over 90 years old. The mystery remains unresolved. What began as a prison security breach became one of the most enduring escape questions in modern history. Not because of dramatic evidence, but because of uncertainty. Alcatraz was meant to symbolize control. Instead, it became a reminder that even the most advanced systems can contain unknown outcomes. And in that uncertainty, the story continues to live. But beyond the mystery of survival lies a larger lesson about institutions, assumptions, and the limits of absolute security. What the broken safe revealed. The 1962 Alcatraz escape did more than create a mystery. It exposed a lesson about systems. Alcatraz had been designed as a final solution for high-risk inmates. It relied on isolation, routine, and physical barriers. For nearly 30 years, it carried a reputation of absolute control. But the escape showed something important. Security is not only about strength. It is also about adaptation. The prison's walls were solid. The water was cold. The guards were trained. Yet small details, aging concrete, predictable routines, and used spaces, created gaps that were never fully examined. The men did not overpower the system. They studied it. They observed patterns. They worked slowly. They relied on patience instead of force. Their actions highlighted a weakness common in many institutions. When procedures remain unchanged for too long, they can become vulnerable. After Alcatraz closed in 1963, correctional systems across the United States began shifting toward newer models of high-security design. Modern prisons incorporated reinforced materials, electronic monitoring, motion detection, and more dynamic inspection methods. The lesson was clear. No structure is truly escape-proof. True security depends on constant evaluation, maintenance, and accountability. Today, Alcatraz Island operates as a historic site managed by the National Park Service. Millions visit each year to learn about its role in American history, not as a symbol of invincibility, but as a reminder of human ingenuity on both sides of the prison walls. The case of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remains officially unresolved. The U.S. Marshals Service continues to accept credible evidence, though time makes new discoveries increasingly unlikely. Whether the men survived or not, the larger story stands on its own. A prison once called unbreakable was quietly defeated, not through violence but through patience, planning, and overlooked maintenance. And that moment changed how the world thinks about maximum security. The story of Alcatraz is not about glorifying escape. It is about understanding systems, how they are built, how they age, and how even the most advanced designs can fail when assumptions go unchallenged. History often teaches us that confidence without review can become weakness. Alcatraz was once described as the world's safest prison. On June 12, 1962, it became something else. A case study, a warning, and a lasting mystery. If you found this documentary informative and valuable, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe happened in the waters of San Francisco Bay that night? Thank you for watching.